Sveiki, čia pokalbiai, Lyderių studija. Tai pokalbiai apie lyderių komunikaciją, su jais pačiais ir tais, kurie jiems padeda. Welcome to Wow Talks, and today we have a special guest, one of the longest-serving speechwriters for President Obama, Terry Szuplat. Also the author of the book, Say It Well, now touring the UK as a true rock star all over with the book tour. And here we go. Here we are, meeting in Cambridge, where we met for the first time 4 years ago. Right. And we talked there about leadership communication, the same that we will be doing tomorrow and the day after. Good to see you, Terry.
Great to see you too. It's great to be back.
I want to start with a rather provoking question.
Sure.
Imagine that I'm your speechwriter, and you are about to make a speech of your life.
Wow.
How would you like me to start the session?
Well, who's the audience?
Right? You decide.
Okay.
It's more about how the process of speech writing and would go with you if I would write a speech to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I only mean that half jokingly. The first question I always ask myself, and I think anyone should ever ask, is who am I speaking to? Who's my audience? You know, is it a group of professionals? Is it a group of university students? Is it a group of young people? Because you might, we all have our ways of talking. We all have our ways of telling our stories, but who the audience is matters, and where you start your story matters. So I think maybe you'd want to start, I'm sort of maybe speaking to a university audience of students. We would work together, think a lot about the audience, but then I would hope that you would kind of put me through a therapy session, and you would talk to me about who I am and why I do the work that I do. I think when anyone is getting ready to speak to an audience, you have to sort of first answer sort of pretty big, deep questions about who you are, why you do the work you do, what your values are, what you're working towards. Only when you understand all of that and understand your audience, sometimes only then does the speech reveal itself, right? Yeah. And so you might, we don't change day to day, but our audiences change, and we may choose to change the way we talk about ourselves and how we share our stories depending on the audience. And I think that's one of the things that great speakers do. So hopefully we would do that.
Good to know. So talking about the audience, what kind of mistakes we do misjudging the audience sometimes, or the most common mistakes that you see speakers or speechwriters do while judging or misjudging their audiences?
I think it's when we make assumptions about audiences, right? I just said, imagine I'm speaking to a university audience. Okay, well, that's the beginning. Well, what kind of a university audience? What is this university? Do they tend to be more conservative? Do they tend to be more liberal? Are they more traditional institution? Or are they more progressive institution? In my book, I list out all sorts of questions that we should ask ourselves and about our audience before we speak. And so the answers to those questions reveal what the speech could be. Also, you might ask, what has this audience recently gone through? Have they gone through trauma? Have they gone through difficult times? Are they depressed? Do they need a pick-me-up? Are they riding high after a series of victories or achievements? Are they feeling on top of the world? You know this. Great speakers, great leaders channel and reflect and validate and affirm what the audience is feeling, right? If they're sort of down in a place of despair and you come in peppy and all joyful, and there's going to be an emotional mismatch with your audience. So you really want to know, what is my audience feeling right now? And what are they looking for? What does this audience need from me at this moment? What are they looking for? Not just in terms of ideas, but again, number one, they're looking for some sort of emotional connection. And can you give that to them? I think a mistake that a lot of speakers make is we think it's just about policies and numbers and data, and you're just there to talk about a product or a company. Great speakers, I think, do more than that, right? They connect with their audience emotionally. And so, you can't make assumptions about your audience. You have to ask sort of deep questions about who they are and what they're feeling in that moment.
I have to ask that question, but now looking at the political landscape throughout the world, all over the world, do you see that leaders still get that? Are they really feeling their audiences, or is there more a drive to make themselves more visible?
Well, I think effective leaders are doing it. Sometimes they're doing it in a positive way that I think is affirming and lifting people up. I think there are unfortunately a lot of leaders in the world who are demagogues, right? But, as awful as demagogues are, they're doing this too, right? They're looking out at an audience, at a public, at voters, and they see anger, they see fear, they see resentment, and they channel that. And the sad thing is that at times that can work, that you can get enough votes. You can win an election by doing that. But there's also something called hope. And I think some of the most successful leaders in the last few decades, I was lucky to work for one. You mentioned I worked for Barack Obama. I think he tried to speak to people's hopes and aspirations as opposed to their fears. And I felt he was successful in many ways. He wasn't perfect. He'd be the first to say that. But yeah, I think effective, and whether in politics or business or philanthropy or advocacy, the most effective speakers and communicators are ones that do this. It's difficult because it's easier just to get up and give the same speech over and over and over again. But then, talk to people who do that. If you're someone who gives the same speech over and over again and you're disappointed because it's not connecting or resonating with your audience, maybe that's because you haven't thought enough about whether the speech is the right presentation for that particular audience. Just because it worked on Monday with one group doesn't mean it's going to work Tuesday with the next group.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't. You work for the for the person that is considered the role model for public speaking. You want it or not, but I receive it a lot or very often when people say that I would like to speak like Obama. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that you receive that a lot as well. But after having worked with such a prominent person, now I'm sure you are working with a variety of clients. What kind of differences you spot working for a government representative and now working with corporate leaders? First and foremost, from the audience perspective, but from any other perspectives as well.
Yeah, I have people come to me, and there's other former Obama speechwriters, and I think they've had similar experiences. People come to us and say, make me sound like Obama. No, the only person who should sound like Obama is Obama. You should sound like you, and you're not president of the United States, so you shouldn't sound like the president of the United States. And if you're not a prime minister, you shouldn't sound like a prime minister. The speaking and oratorical expectations around a president are profoundly different. And there have been all sorts of cases in the United States where even other candidates have been sort of exposed because they sound a little bit too much like Obama, right? And so you think, well, what's wrong with that? He was a great speaker. Well, what's wrong with that is that it immediately calls into question your authenticity, right? If you sound like someone else, that means you're not sounding like you. And whether your voters or whoever your audience is, immediately then ask, well, who are you really? Are you trying to act like someone? So I think the best public speakers are the people who sound like themselves, right? They're not trying to, you shouldn't ever think you're trying to impersonate, sound like John F. Kennedy or Ronald Reagan or whoever your idol is. You should never sound like them. You should sound like you. And so, you know this from the work you do. The best thing as a speechwriter, you're always trying to help that person find their best version of themselves, their best voice. And so a lot of what we do is we just get our clients talking. Tell me about your life. Tell me about your work. Why do you do the work you do? Why do you care so much about this company or this cause? And we're listening, and we're recording, and we're transcribing. And at our best, when it's working, we are capturing their voice and helping them express their ideas. So I had a client once who gave a speech. It went well, and he texted and said, oh my God, it was amazing. I sounded just like Obama. And he was thrilled, and I was terrified. And I thought, what do you mean? And I thought, I immediately went back to the speech, and I looked, had I inadvertently given him lines that I had given Obama? Like, what did he mean? And he meant just that the feeling, the audience reaction, the cheers, the applause, he felt was like an Obama speech. So that was nice. But but he had his own voice. And so, yeah, anyone who says, make me sound like Obama, I want to talk like Obama, no, don't do that. Find your voice. That's one of the things I talk about in the book. That's what audiences want to hear, right? That's why they've invited you to speak or given you this platform to speak because they want to hear from you, not because they want to hear an impersonation of some other person.
But you mentioned one element that for me it's curious from professional side. After having worked how many years? 8 years or 10 years for Obama?
Oh, 8.
How long did it take for you to get away from the Obama style inside of you?
Sure. Oh, it took a while. And I think there are a number of us who've gone on to write books or write articles in our own voice. I think we all had these similar experiences where we're writing and you're writing something and you write like, at this defining moment, America has a choice. And you're like, what am I doing? Like, that's a speech, and that's a speech in Barack Obama's voice because, yeah, for 8 years you were writing up here for this person. So, yeah, it took a while for, I think, each of us to find our own voice. And so, actually, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because that process of figuring out my voice and what I believed, I spent 8 years not really thinking too much about what I believed in terms of policy because my job was to understand Obama's agenda, his policies, and help him make his best case. But yeah, suddenly you're out there, and it took me a while, and I struggled with it. It wasn't easy. I wasn't always sure how I could make a contribution to a conference or an event, and what I could say, and why anyone should listen to me. And so I went through that process, and I think it's a process that we all have to go through to be the best speakers that we can.
Walk us through a little bit through the process. How did it go when you were writing speeches with Obama? So I'm sure that there were different speeches. For some of the speeches you prepared more, for some maybe less. But how, for those selected important speeches, what was the process like?
Yeah, and this I think is a good rule for all of us, whether we're preparing a presentation to give ourselves or whether we're helping someone. But the process for the really big ones, the really important ones, would start with him. So before we went off and spent weeks researching and talking to people all over the government, we would go into the Oval Office and sit with him and just listen to him and say, okay, in a few weeks you have the speech coming up. Here's the audience. What's on your mind? What are you thinking? What are the big ideas that you might want to hit? And sometimes he came in with a big idea. Other times he may have even scratched out an outline. But I think that's really important, right? Before you get too deep and start agonizing over every line and every word, trying to get it just right, you have to have the big idea right. And so one of the things that I encourage people in the book is, again, before you ever write a word, create a slide, just give yourself some time, sit, and ask yourself, what is this presentation about? Maybe 10 words or less. What's the big idea of this speech?
But would he give that big idea, or he would expect from you that bring me that big idea?
It would depend. So we would always come with ideas, but we weren't there necessarily to push our ideas on him. So we would start by saying, here's the speech, here's the event, here's the coming. Are there any particular thoughts where you think we should be headed? And again, sometimes he had already thought about it and brought those ideas to the meeting. I remember one time that it was one of the military academies, like our Coast Guard, the folks who guard the shorelines. It's not the big Navy, but it's the Coast Guard. And, they weren't as active in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so, obviously Afghanistan. So what does the commander-in-chief talk to them about? Well, we figured they're on the front lines of climate change. And no president had ever given sort of a speech about climate change from a national security perspective. So we mentioned, one idea that we had was maybe this could be the first speech ever by an American president to our military about the threat of climate change and what it will mean for our military and how we need to adapt. And he said, "That's sure, give it a shot. Let me see let me see it." He wasn't committing to it, but he said, "That's interesting. Give it a shot. Work on it and show it to me, and we'll decide." And he ended up doing it. And so that was one where we brought the idea. But many times, he often had a very clear sense of what he wanted the headline to be, what he wanted people to be talking about after the speech was done. And again, a great reminder to all of us, it's really easy to just start writing. And we have to give a presentation. It's an empty page. It's kind of scary. We just start writing. We start creating slides, and then we feel good. But then maybe you have 100 slides. And I've had this experience with clients. They have 100 slides. And you ask them, what is this about? What is this presentation? They can't
about
answer
us.
it. It's about the 100 slides. Well, that's not the right answer. So I think going through, he was really good at thinking through something. Here's a crazy thought. Thinking through what you're going to say before you say it. So I think it's a good lesson for all of us.
So big idea. What else was in the process?
So he gives us the big guidance, say 2-3 weeks out or a week out, whatever it is. And then we, as the speechwriter, have to sort of pull 1,000 ideas together from across the government. So we've got the policy people feeding us ideas. We've got the diplomats feeding us ideas. We've got different offices across the White House, the political team, the press team, the communications team. Everyone's weighing in. And it's your job as a speechwriter to somehow take all these ingredients and create something beautiful, right? And what I loved about it, what I love about the job, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, is as someone who loves history and government and politics and culture, the speechwriter is the one place in the government where you get to think about all that. So your president's getting ready to go to Indonesia, and so you read up on Indonesian poetry.
Yes.
And that's part of your job, is because, it'd be nice if the president maybe showed a little respect for the culture he's visiting and honor their heritage and maybe quote a poet that they admire and love. And that's a nice touch and have a nice emotional connection. So this process would go for weeks. We'd reach out to historians all over the world, researchers, scholars. One of the cool things when you work at the White House, most people pick up your calls and they call you back. So that's, I have a harder time. I left the White House, and suddenly no one returns my calls. I guess it wasn't me. That was, come down to earth a little bit. But it's really to blend all of that and then to see it work. It's a wonderful thing. And we would try to then finish a few days before the event, circulate it, and get, endless edits from people all across the government. And again, once again, your job is to sift through them all and to not lose the president's voice in that whole process, right? As we are accepting edits and corrections and inputs from dozens of people across the government, to try to make sure that when you're in the audience hearing it, you're like, no, this isn't just some lowest common denominator, generic government official speaking. It's Barack Obama.
Can we stop here? How you make sure that the voice is not lost? What are the procedures, or who was the person who was in charge of not losing the voice? And
we were.
Except Obama.
Anytime we hired a new speechwriter, one of my pieces of advice to them was, okay, we've got a lot of lawyers in the building, and their job is to make sure we're doing things legally. We have policy people to make sure that we have the right policies that achieve the goals we want. We have communications people who make sure that our message gets out. Here in the speechwriting office, we're the keepers of his voice. Every day we were listening to him, studying him, reading his transcripts, trying as best we could to understand how he thinks, how he speaks. It's our job to make sure that the scripts that go up to him reflect that voice. So when, a lawyer who correctly identifies a mistake in the draft then writes, half a page of text to correct it, you look at that and go, that's your voice, that's not the president's voice. How can we make the point you need to make in the voice of Barack Obama? And it took me, listen, the only way you can learn someone else's voice is by spending a lot of time with them. I spent probably the first 2 years that I worked for him, writing speeches, but also in any free moment that I got, I just put on my headset, go to YouTube and listen to him speak. Because, the only way you can learn how someone talks is just to hear them over and over again. So, we joke that speechwriters have voices in their head, right? We hear voices all day long. It's the voices of the people that we work for. So for 8 years, the voice of Barack Obama was in my head. And it's your job to preserve and keep his voice.
There were definitely those kind of big, important political speeches, but I'm also interested in the president's speeches to its staff. Was anyone writing those speeches, or how was he different then? Could you elaborate more? Obama talking during birthdays or...
Oh, sure. That's interesting. Yeah. No, we wouldn't. So a small gathering of staff.
Internal communication,
right,
in other words.
Internal.
Yes.
So I'll answer that to it. So small, private, personal events in the Oval Office or across the hall at someone's birthday, an event. He pops in. He's just at that point. He's not so much president of the United States anymore. He's just your boss, right? And he's doing what any good boss does, which is thanking you for your work, giving examples of how you've made, his job easier. Thanking the team and just being a normal human being, right? What you might find interesting is a lot of the speeches that presidents give, yes, they're for the public, but they're also for the millions of people who work in the U.S. government who need to know what's our mission, what's our objective, what is the policy. So it was real. Those things were more scripted in big public events. So yeah, you as a citizen were watching and listening, and it was important that you understood what the policy of the United States was. But we were also writing for those men and women in uniform, the men and women who do the work in the intelligence community, the Defense Department, the Interior Department, the agriculture. I mean, they need to know what our agriculture policy is. And so at that point, yeah, the President of the United States is also engaging in some basically internal communications, making sure that the employees know what their agenda is.
Terry before joining the White House and Terry after leaving the White House. What have you learned about, first, the speech writing, or how it changed your perspective because you were a speechwriter before as well? And also, how has it changed your perspective on leadership communication as well?
So you get to be a White House speechwriter because you've done it for a while, and I guess you've reached a certain level of competence. So you come in thinking, I know what I'm doing. And yet then you write for someone like Barack Obama, who's just a masterful communicator, storyteller, and every day was a masterclass learning from him, which is another reason I wrote the book. I thought, wow, I learned so much from him. Why don't share these lessons with people around the world who want to get better at this as well? And I think I tend to be a very linear thinker. Oh, the speech, it's a foreign policy speech. It has these five, it's an opening introduction. It's going to have a beautiful soaring conclusion. But in the middle, it has 4 boxes. It has 4 pieces, or it has 6 pieces, whatever. I needed to know what the pieces were. And I think one of the things that made Barack Obama such an effective speaker is that he thought like that too. But he also thought in bigger terms about, what's the value system we're trying to uphold here? What's the argument we're trying to make? And the times where I struggled with the most was when I didn't understand his argument or I had misunderstood his guidance. And so I think one of the things I learned was not to be so rigid. I mean, I'm a firm believer in being focused and being concrete and having an outline and knowing where you're going. But sometimes it's not about a concrete, specific policy. One of the most important things a leader can do is lay out a vision or affirm a set of values. And I think, you ask people, what did you admire about a Barack Obama speech? They're not probably going to list a specific policy, right? They're going to talk about how he made them feel, how he gave them hope, how he sort of pointed a way towards a more inclusive future, right? And that's not, and all those answers are not about a particular policy. So I think thinking bigger about speeches is something I learned to do from him.
And looking to the kind of political reality at the moment, all over the world, not only in the United States. And I'm sure that when you were writing for Obama, there were kind of big speeches and when the audience was supportive, and when the big speeches when the audience was not so much supportive. So what had you taken into account when writing for audiences that don't think like you think, or like Democrats think?
Sure.
Because that's a lesson that we need to learn and relearn how to address audiences that not necessarily like us, love us, support us.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have just as citizens, we sometimes forget that clearly people don't see the world the way you see it. So when you're going to go out and, I learned this over time, when you're going to make the case for your policy, I, as a person, you, anybody, is going to make it their argument in the way that makes sense to them, right? This is what resonates for me. This is the thought. This is what has persuaded me to believe in this policy or this vision. Therefore, that is how I'm going to describe it to others. But maybe someone who's more conservative or someone who's more liberal or someone from a different country or culture approaches it from a completely different perspective, a completely different value set. So I think one of the things you have to do if you're setting out to try to connect or persuade with a group of people who are skeptical of you is to ask yourself, why? What are their values? What's important to them? And can you possibly frame your position or your argument around the things that they value? So if they tell you that I'm just thinking of U.S. examples, but if they tell you that their faith is deeply important to them, then that you better be acknowledging that and showing some respect for that, and as best you can show that your particular agenda or policy is consistent with their faith or affirms their faith, is not at odds with their faith. But if you're not a person of faith, that might be very difficult for you. You might if you're not a person of faith, then you might not make your argument that way because that's not persuasive to you. So I think I lay out in the book, this is a hard thing to do, right? We all have our own value systems. We see the world the way we see it. It's really hard to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, see the world from their perspective, and then make your best argument that might appeal to them. I mean, there's all sorts of studies like this. People are really, really bad at this. I teach a speech writing course at the university. It's one of the assignments I give my students to try to do this. And it's a real challenge, I think, for a lot of us because, again, we make the arguments that make sense to us.
And from our perspective.
Because that's why we believe what we believe, from our perspective. But maybe that's not the best way to convince somebody else. It's a hard thing to do.
It is.
It is. Obama tried, right? Obama, I think, tried a lot. He recognized that there's people across the political spectrum. He tried to frame his arguments in a way that would bring the most people in. I think one of the tragedies of President Trump is that he gave up long ago on trying to persuade people. It seems as though he has decided to be president of Republicans, president of MAGA. He is not, and so he's not trying to persuade anybody on the left anymore. He is, he calls them radicals, left, lunatics. They hate America. They're enemy. I mean, clearly that's not the way to persuade somebody. That's just about demonizing other people. So there's some lessons in that for us too.
One more myth I want to touch with you is rehearsing. Working with my client, but also hearing a lot of questions from community in Lithuania, I hear this skepticism towards rehearsing and fear of rehearsing. So how was the President of the United States rehearsing? Was he rehearsing, and how did the process look like?
Well, I mean, to be honest, by the time he became president, he was pretty good at this, right? But his very first speech that he ever gave that really catapulted him to fame, 2004, he gave a keynote speech at the Democratic Convention, 16, 17 minutes long, and people thought, well, maybe this guy could be president someday. I wasn't involved with that at all, but he talked to me about how he prepared that. He wrote it down, he practiced, he rehearsed over and over and over again. If the teleprompter had broken, he would have been able to give the speech because he really had practiced it so much. For the big State of the Union events, even when he was president, he would practice those out loud. So even the President of the United States, as busy as he was, found time to practice for the important speeches. For the rest of us, I think it's a really good reminder. Practice is so important. Again, speeches, presentations, they're auditory experiences. They're meant to be, spoken. They're meant to be heard. And if the first time you're saying these words is in front of an audience, that's a recipe for disaster because you might not be able to pronounce the words correctly or the sentences might be too long. You'll be a much better communicator if you practice. But I have a rule. I basically encourage people, however much time you have to get ready for a speech, spend about 50% of your time just researching and learning, maybe about 25% of your time writing, and set aside a good 25% of your time for practicing and editing and making it better. You'll be so much better.
But do you succeed convincing now your clients to dedicate that 25%? Be honest.
It's hard. Be honest, right? It's hard. People are busy, and I get that. Mm-hmm. But if you want to be your best, if you want to get better, you need to practice. I mean, you have to ultimately decide what you want to do. If you're happy with how you are and you're content with going to the podium, having never read the speech out loud to the mirror just once, do it. But you're gonna be better, and everybody wants to be better.
But I'm interested, kind of your personal, professional take. Why people are so much afraid and hesitant to rehearse?
Well, listen, public speaking can be scary. It can be unnerving. It can be anxiety-inducing. And what are you doing when you're practicing? You're doing all of that. So I think people get nervous, standing in front of a mirror, reading, or giving a speech, recording it, and then listening to your own voice. Again, no one loves doing that. Mm-hmm. But, so it's hard. It can be a little cringy sometimes to hear your own voice. Listen, you're doing it and you make mistakes. So I think there's a lot of I get the resistance to doing it. It's scary and it's time consuming. But
how was a speechwriter's team when you were working for Obama? How would you help him to rehearse? How you would write the text? What were the elements that you would think that's the help?
Yeah. So like I said, he only rehearsed for the big ones like State of the Union speech, but we would write the speeches in a way that we would hope that would make it easier for him to deliver. Let me say, first of all, we also gave him the speeches many days in advance, right? So, if you're a CEO or you're a business person and you're not seeing the speech that your team wrote until a few hours before, that's not good. That's a recipe for failure.
Mildly said.
I'm sorry?
Mildly said.
Yeah, mild. That's not going to go well. You need to be part of the process. And so, again, president would see the speech 1, 2, 3 days before. And again, even if he wasn't going to practice out loud, he's reading it over. He's sending us edits. We're writing it in big, large font because that makes it easier to read. If tiny. I mean, these some of the great speakers focus on little things, and it's making sure that your font is big so it's easy to read, so you can look up at your audience. Making sure that your sentences don't run from page to page because you don't want to be turning a page in the middle of an important thought. Making sure that all the pages are there. One time President Obama was giving a speech and he was really getting into it and he turned the page and it was blank. He turned the next page and it was blank. Someone had forgotten to put the speech in. So you print it out, have the speech with you, count it out, make sure all the pages are there. They seem like small things, but Obama would do them too.
So when people are now coming to you and asking what makes a good speech, what are the 3 elements that make a good speech?
I guess you got to know yourself, what's important to you, your beliefs, your convictions, your values, because a great speaker brings all of that to their speech. Know the values of your audience, what's important to them, what they're feeling, what they care about. And then remember that you are ultimately there to connect human to human. So tell human stories. Don't get caught up in too much data, too much jargon, too much buzzwords. Talk to people the way you would talk to them if you were sitting across a table from them having coffee. So many leaders, especially in business, don't sound like normal people. And yet they are. We know they are. And so, it's remember that the audience wants you. They don't want a bot. They don't want a machine. They don't want AI, right? And so they just want to hear. They want to hear what's in your heart, what's in what you believe, what your values are, and how you can make their life better. And I think that's what the greatest leaders and speakers have done throughout history, and that's what I think great leaders need to keep doing.
So from the speech writing world, now you entered public speaking world. Personally as well, especially with the book tour going around in the States, in the UK, maybe you're coming to Lithuania as well. Is there anything you would write now differently in your book after having this experience?
Yeah, well, I did write about the importance of being brief and always cutting. You think you're done.
Living now.
Now that I'm doing it, and I realize, boy, I tell people, you think you're done, cut 15%, make it shorter. And my presentations always tend to be a little bit longer than I'd like them to be. I think the audiences are enjoying them, but yeah, I generally find that I have too much content. And so, again, that rule of cutting. Obama once came to me. He said to me, he was holding a speech I had written. He said, "This is a good 6-page speech. It would be a great 5-page speech." And he said, "See if you can cut a page off this speech," which he was giving in about an hour.
Oh,
so okay, I'm like, wow. So now, as a general rule, it's better to, 1 page off a 6-page speech is about 15%-ish. So I tell people now, you think you're done, put it down, come back, just cut 15%. It'll be shorter, tighter, and you'll be a better speaker.
Thank you, Terry. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope one day you will come to Vilnius as well.
Thank you. But don't cut 15% of this interview.
I hope not.
All right. Thanks so much for having me. I'd love to come to Lithuania.
Thank you.
Thank you.